staying with us for our In Focus discussion tonight on abolishing the death penalty. Joining us now is Utah State Senator Daniel Mckay, who is planning on running a bill to get rid of executions in Utah. Senator, thank you for your time and for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's start with some history. Could you tell us a little bit and help us recap the U.S. Supreme Court case Furman versus Georgia, which put a hold on executions?
You know, the Furman case was really interesting because there were, a pretty consistent stream of death by the death penalty cases in the country. And then the Furman case came and basically said that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment. Interestingly, there were two of the justices on the court, if I remember right, it was Earl Warren and the name escapes me. I'm a little bit of a Supreme Court nerd, so asking me a Supreme Court question could put me on here for too long. But they, there were only two of the justices of the 9 on the court at the time that held that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment in all instances, which then left a gate for the review. Gregg v. Georgia came along shortly after that, and the Gregg v. Georgia case really reinstituted the death penalty in the country and really set up some procedural due process rights that needed to be set up for the death penalty to occur. And what it had really was a chilling effect. Some of the primary things that we kind of take for granted but really happened in the early 70s in the Gregg case was the idea that the states had to set up protections to make sure that it wasn't racially indiscriminate, that the death penalty was applied equally to everyone, and had to set up additional due process for evidentiary matters because up to that point, there were a lot of people that were believed to have been innocent that had been executed. And so that changing dynamic, what that did was it really slowed the process of somebody who had been sentenced to die via the death penalty, and from that time to their execution, that time grew significantly. And here we are, we look at Utah, we have 7 people who are on death row currently, and the longest person is over 35 years. And so we're looking at a situation where people are more likely to die in prison than they are to die via the death penalty.
And Utah became the first state to execute a prisoner after that case you were talking about, Gregg v. Georgia. Does that event impact how you view capital punishment in Utah?
It just was how, who was ready, I guess, and who was next up, I guess, in the death penalty. The Gilmore case was certainly a horrific crime, and the families suffered significantly as a result of the Gilmore crime. And the hard part about, looking back and saying, well, does that justify where we are today? And I would argue that's not really the right way to look at it for the way I look at it. I have to look at it as a lawmaker dispassionately somewhat, and I have to separate myself really from, the facts or any gruesome, facts of a case or a murder as it may have occurred, and really have to stop and look at the practical application of the death penalty and how the death penalty is working in the state of Utah. And I think that is probably the better way to get to a conclusion as to what the right policy ought to be.
So let's turn now to capital punishment from a moral perspective. Two contrasting biblical phrases are often used in regards to the death penalty, right? An eye for an eye and turn the other cheek. How do you look at capital punishment from a moral perspective?
Boy, that is, it's rare that someone asks me on camera about biblical references, so I'm grateful, and if I'm a little bit of a nerd, I'm probably a nerd about those things too. The eye for an eye was obviously an Exodus reference, which is in the first 4 books of Genesis, first 4 books of the Old Testament. And the Levitical law that existed at that time was very much, very eye for an eye. And that was a very rudimentary level of the law, and people lived it. And you look, though, and Jesus, when the Savior came along, and brought his gospel into the world and changed things, and that's where you see turn the other cheek. And it's interesting, the turn the other cheek, a rabbi was asked, well, how many times should a person turn the other cheek? And Jesus said, and the rabbi responded that 3 was the right number. And Peter, his apostle and follower, felt like, you know, he was being extra gregarious and thought, well, maybe seven's the right number. And Jesus responded that 7 times 70 would be a better way to forgive. And I think what he's highlighting there is not that the specific number, 7 times 70, 490, you know, okay, at 491, you don't need to forgive anymore. I don't think that's it. You're not sitting here trying to do a moral math on how long you ought to forgive somebody. I think what Jesus is really trying to institute for a moral application is that forgiveness is like for everyone, in every situation. I look at this, and I was most touched recently, just because we're talking about capital punishment. Sirhan was up for parole in California. And obviously, he was the assassin of Robert Kennedy Jr. in California. And when he was up for parole, members of the Kennedy family actually went to the parole hearing and spoke on behalf of his attempt to receive parole. And it was interesting, you see in the news article that Robert Kennedy Jr. talked about the impact of his whole life. He'd lived kind of in fear of Sirhan. And then meeting him and getting to know him a little bit really changed his heart and really changed how he looked at Sirhan and saw that, you know, there's a person there and that maybe forgiveness is possible. And I look at that and apply that to the Savior's teaching and say, maybe that's the way we ought to go. But, you know, it's easy for me to say, and I don't want this to be lost, because it is easy for me to say, my family fortunately has not been impacted by a murder, a direct murder, that, and then have a capital punishment be instituted on that murder. And so, because I'm
Senator,
fortunate, I get to talk about it theoretically.
I'm going to cut you off real quick just because we have to toss to break.
You're great.
But we'll pick up this conversation when we come back with Senator Daniel Mckay from Riverton. Stay with us. Welcome to our final In Focus discussion tonight on abolishing the death penalty. We pick up now with Senator Daniel Mckay of Riverton, who is working on a bill to get rid of capital punishment in our state. Senator, can you talk about the legal process for capital punishment cases? How successful are they to prosecute, and how expensive can they be?
Boy, you know, we have looked at you know, the average incarceration, if you just have an average, you know, incarcerated individual at the prison, it costs about $25,000 per year to house that person. That includes, you know, appeals, courts, travel, all those other things. But that cost ramps significantly up for death penalty cases, and it's because there are additional procedural due process requirements. Again, we talked about that earlier in the in the Supreme Court. And I would say that those additional procedural due process requirements are good because they really protect people. We don't want people who are innocent to be dying, which is an interesting statistic. And since 1973, and since the Supreme Court did make it harder for the death penalty to be implemented, we've seen an acquittal of 185 people from death row, right? And so when you see 185 people have been let go that might not have, had there not been additional procedural due process requirements, that's got to have a chilling thing. And then you look at the American Academy of Sciences, who says that maybe as many as 4 or 5% of people that are currently on death row may still be innocent. And so the procedural process is difficult, it's lengthy, and it is expensive. Some studies from other states say that the cost for a life without possibility of parole costs those states about $1 million, $1.2 million. And for death penalty cases, with all the appeals and the legal work that goes along with it, that those costs can be upwards of $3 million per individual. We don't have great numbers here in Utah that we can compare it to, but by analogy, it can't be that far off, and it's much less expensive and much less likely to punish an innocent person with the fatal result.
Now, Senator, before we get into your bill, can you talk about past attempts in our state to abolish the death penalty from the state and why it failed during all those times?
Well, it failed because this is a hard subject. I mean, this isn't something that, you know, you just wake up one day and decide you're going to run a bill on. This is a soul-searching, and it's very difficult. In the past, so in 2016, Senator Steve Urquhart, former senator, has now left the body, ran a death penalty repeal, and it got out of the Senate, got to the House, and didn't get a final vote in the House. So everybody decided, well, we'll start it in the House. And so in 2016, Gage Froer started a bill, or maybe it was 2018, Representative Gage Froer ran a bill, ran out of time as well, didn't get a final vote. So here we are in 2021. We've done, and as opposed to those bills popped up during the session. This is different though. We're in September and we're having these conversations now with lawmakers, and we're having these conversations with the public. We're having these conversations with the victims and their families, with the victims' families. And those conversations, I think, are going to lead us in a better path with a better result at the end, that because we've taken the preparatory work, that we'll be in a better position to pass it.
Other than the preparatory work, does your proposed bill differ from any of the previous bills? And, you know, this kind of feels like an uphill battle. What gives you, hope that this bill will stand a chance this upcoming session?
Well, I'm stubborn like an ox at times, but I'm also strong and don't mind the uphill battle. I'll tell you that this bill is a little bit different. Instead of just a repeal, one of the complaints that we've had in the past was that this would take away tools from prosecutors to be successful in negotiating with potential accused murderers. And so what this will do is it will add a third. In addition to 25 years to life and life without parole, it would kind of add a middle ground where there's 45 years to life. And that 45 years to life can obviously be an effective tool for prosecutors to use when they're negotiating with especially young accused, that they wouldn't want to spend 45 years or even life without parole. And so providing that additional tool will help prosecutors, we think. And also one other difference is that this won't apply to cases that have already been decided and that are waiting for the death penalty. This will only apply for cases going forward that the murder occurs after the effectivity of the bill.
Senator, we have to wrap it real quick. I want to give you an opportunity for final words. What would you like our viewers to think about tonight when it comes to this topic? So
I would recommend a book. It's a book that I've read, and I would encourage it. You've seen the movie Just Mercy, and I would add to it that Brian Hinton wrote a book called The Sun Does Shine. And I would encourage everyone to grab it, read it, and if you want, just email me. I'll send you a copy from Amazon. And that's a lot of books actually, I just thought about it, so maybe you get 50% off. But you get the idea is, I pick up a book and search your soul as you read that book and see if there's a way we can try and make this a better process, try and make this something that protects the innocent, because that's my real problem with the death penalty, is that one, it does have the potential for killing the innocent, and two, it is expensive. And so I'm hopeful that Utah will take an opportunity and do what we always do, which is search for the best solutions.
You've been hearing from Senator Daniel Mckay of Riverton. And Senator, thank you so much for your time to talk to us about this topic tonight.
You're welcome.
Now, our team reached out to multiple people and groups to come on our show to talk about why they believe Utah needs to keep the death penalty. Unfortunately, no one could participate at this date and time, but we did receive a statement from Representative Paul Ray of Clearfield, who supports keeping the death penalty. He wrote, quote, "Almost every legislative session we consider a bill attempting to do away with the death penalty, and every year it fails to make it through the process. If we want to continue pushing this issue, I believe it should go in front of voters. Let the people of Utah decide. While this issue is highly controversial and emotional, it is important we keep victims and their families at top of mind. Their voices should be at the forefront of the conversation." And don't forget, we'd love to hear from you about the show. We invite you to join our Facebook group by searching for ABC4 In Focus, or send us an email, infocus@abc4.com.